I invite you to gather with me in prayer. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words you hear be captured by your soul and enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. I wasn't aware that this coming week is the anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's assassination. Last Monday, was Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the United States. And that this year marks 51 years since he was assassinated. And boy, doesn't that really date you when you can remember the time when it happened. There was an Alban Institute article written to commemorate the day. The Alban Institute was an American organization which did consulting, educating, and publishing for mainline Protestant denominations until it folded in 2014. Various aspects of its activity were taken on by other organizations, and an Alban weekly newsletter continues to be published by Duke University in North Carolina. The newsletter article published for Martin Luther King Day was titled, "Don't Look for Another Martin Luther King. Look Within." The article seemed to me to confirm some of the strengths, but also some of the weaknesses found in the charismatic leadership of someone like Dr. King. It also really seemed to me to connect with the scripture readings and the theme that Jim had chosen for today in his ongoing series, No Ordinary Time. The article voiced some problems that tend to arise around charismatic leadership. Firstly, that we tend to magnify the gifts and accomplishments of the person until they appear more than human, almost a demigod. Not that we shouldn't be grateful for the gifts they give us by their leadership, but that we should realize that their leadership isn't limitless. Dr. King was a charismatic speaker for the civil rights movement. His voice still rings out today and inspires 50 years later. But there were and continue to be a large group of other leaders of that movement who really organized the work of the movement so that it wasn't destroyed by his death. The anti-apartheid movement in South Africa wasn't so fortunate. Nelson Mandela almost single-handedly brought apartheid to its knees and finally to its death. Bishop Desmond Tutu brought a religious focus to the movement, and together they helped to see apartheid end without a bloodbath. But it seems they didn't have the skills, nor were there leaders that followed to give the stature needed by the African National Congress to move South Africa to full democracy. The government has been plagued by mismanagement and corruption, so that in some ways, they are hardly further ahead than they were when apartheid ended. India was not so lucky as South Africa. Mahatma Gandhi brought his courage and vision to the movement, which finally ended British rule in India. But then he was assassinated, and the leaders that tried to move the fragile country along to self-government and peace squabbled amongst themselves, and their infighting magnified amongst their followers, ending in the terrible slaughters which happened during partition. Make no mistake, the events I'm describing would likely never have happened without the leadership of those charismatic men. The end of apartheid, the end of British rule, the movement of the civil rights movement in the States. They did great things for their movements. But they didn't do it all. They couldn't do it all. The Alban Institute article said that another problem around that kind of charismatic leadership is that we end up thinking that we can never measure up. And when they are gone, we are left feeling helpless, left with the inability to move on and to accomplish the things that are before us to do, because their leadership is missing. Let me hazard a suggestion that we were trying to do the same thing with Jim here in Winfield. Not that we were sitting him up on a pedestal, that was so far above us, but that we feared that with him gone, we would never be able to accomplish what we had set out to do under his leadership. This morning's gospel lesson tells a story of when God's Spirit came on Jesus and propelled him into a ministry which transformed the world. If we were looking for a charismatic leader, Jesus certainly was that. I don't know about you, but when I read those stories of Jesus and his interaction with the crowds, one of the things I wish for is that I wish I could have been there, standing on the edge of the crowd and see how he magnetized the people and transformed their world and their very being. You can get hints of it from the reading, but nothing would replace being able to be there and see for yourself. It must have been startling to see how people reacted to him. I believe, though, that the one big difference between Jesus and the other charismatic leaders that I have mentioned is that he planned for when he could no longer be at the center of the movement. He prepared the people who are going to follow him. Read John's Gospel of the last few days in Jerusalem before Passover and Jesus' crucifixion. He spent those days with the disciples, preparing them for what lay ahead and encouraging them to believe in themselves and in their gifts. Jesus told them that the Spirit of the Lord, which had anointed him and given him the power for his life and work, would come upon them too. And it did. Jesus told them that if they believed in him and followed him, they would do all of the works that he had done, and that they would do even greater works than he had done. And they did. Not as individuals. Jesus had prepared people like Peter for leadership after he had gone, but there was no one person to whom the mantle passed. Jesus had given his vision and bestowed the power, or promised the power, on the whole community. And it was as a faithful community that Jesus' followers spread his word and actions far beyond the hills of Galilee, where he had begun his ministry, and to the edges of the world as they knew it, the Roman Empire. The power of the Spirit which lay on that community made them a movement that was far beyond anything that the Roman Empire had ever seen before. John Dominic Crossan, an Irish theologian, says that the Roman Empire did to Jesus' followers what they always did to movements that challenged the authority or the vision of Rome. They destroyed the leaders with the expectation that the whole movement would fall apart without leadership. And for the Christians, it didn't happen. The whole community continued to grow. New leaders came up. The movement continued until Rome finally realized that it was far beyond their ability to control. They couldn't control or end that movement. And they had to find another way to deal with that movement. The point of the Martin Luther King article in the Alban Institute newsletter was that instead of setting up the model of leadership by a charismatic person, we should look to the leadership of the community to move ahead. The article said, take seriously the phrase, power to the people, and embody the spirit that calls us to look for leaders within, that calls us to reach out to others, to join together, to form coalitions, to make change right where we are. That's where I think this movement is calling us. That is the attitude that is missing in so many groups who feel that they can't move on unless they find the right leader, if they're going to accomplish anything. I think initially that was the attitude that we had here at Winfield. How were we ever going to find a leader like Jim to carry us on and to move us in the direction that we felt called to go? But it's changed. While we give credit and are grateful for Jim's leadership, I have heard more and more the sentiment that it's the power of the Spirit alive and present in the community that will move us forward. I think we all have heard talk about the dearth of real leadership in the world today. There's no political leaders to move the world ahead with a vision of peace and compassion. The church is dying for a lack of leadership that knows how to attract people back into the community. And I believe that even a spirit-filled community like ours needs leadership to accomplish its call and vision. But, and here's the only mention I will make of Jim's title for today, Living Wisdom. I believe that when the community is a confident, Spirit-led community, aware of its strength and its vision, it will be able to call forth the leaders that it needs to help fulfill that vision. I believe that is the lesson that the early church learned from Jesus and now passes on to us.